Our next speaker on the floor is Speaker of the Danish Parliament, Mogens Lykketoft.
Thank you very much for the invitation to address this important conference. I think that it is, as the rector of Esbjerg Gymnasium just said, extremely important that the young generation deal with the global problems and think about how to improve the role of the United Nations in order to solve conflicts, to fight underdevelopment, and to solve the threatening imbalances in the global climate. There's always the question, is the United Nations relevant? And the answer is yes, certainly the United Nations is relevant. But the fact is also that it is only able to deal with the big problems if the major powers of this world agree that that should be the role of the United Nations. You can never expect more to happen. But I think that there are trends in the international development telling us, and I'll return to that in a few moments, that the wish to use the United Nations as the instrument instead of unilateral actions from great powers or coalitions of the willing, as we have seen in for instance, Iraq, that the United Nations will be more in the center of even the more difficult problems to be solved. Because no major power, not even the United States, no longer has the ability, despite of huge military power and superiority in technology, to solve difficult problems in faraway countries, be it, as we saw, the try in Iraq, Afghanistan, or be it in Syria. It has to be a common effort through the United Nations, supported by the major powers. But of course, there is also, in my view, a tendency to focus too much on what the United Nations not up till now has been able to do, and not on all the things that are actually being done. Remember all the different special organizations connected with the United Nations, just to mention a few. The United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees, which is an extremely important work being done, the work with human rights, the health organization, UNICEF for children, the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. But of course, and the peacekeeping operations are at the highest point ever, the peacekeeping operations directed by the United Nations. There are 120,000 soldiers under United Nations command in different peacekeeping operations around the world right now. So don't underestimate the importance of what the United Nations is actually able to do. But of course, there are a lot of discussions. There are the discussion of the institutional framework. Are we able to reform the UN Security Council so that the composition of the permanent members is more in line with the present world than with the world of 1945? Yes, that's an important work. Yes, that's a very, very, very difficult work. But still, I think we have to think like this. Maybe the Danish constitution is not up to date, but anyway, we use it. We use this framework until we are able to find a majority to change it. And the United Nations Security Council, the body that can take action for the whole world community with binding effect, is there, and we can use it in a number of important situations. And as a matter of fact, those who have the permanent seats and the vetoing power in the UN Security Council, and I agree with President Hollande that should be reduced in use, but those who have the permanent membership, the 5 big from 1945, you can say yes, but still it's rather relevant because no economic decisions with global importance can be made without the United States, China, and the European Union. And we have, among the 5, the United States, China, and 2 of the major members of the European Union. And as we have seen in recent events in the Middle East, no major decisions can be fulfilled trying to solve problems, trying to limit the risk of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, trying to end the conflicts in the Middle East in general, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the nuclear issue with Iran, and especially the bloody civil war in Syria. Nothing of that can be reached without a consensus among the major powers, including, as we saw it in Syria, Russia. Russia is maybe not a global player in the same way as the Soviet Union, certainly not is, but Russia is, in the broader Middle East region, a necessary partner, a troublesome but necessary partner for peace. And what we saw in Syria over the late summer was, I think, in a rather confused way, the right conclusion also from the President of the United States. There is no military solution in Syria. There's only a negotiated one. If you are not willing to deploy a few 100,000 Western soldiers on the ground, and I think the conclusion after Iraq and Afghanistan and the very limited success of these actions is that there will be deployed not a few 100,000 Western troops on the ground. And if so is, you have to use all the power to get the fighting parties to a negotiation table. There is no military solution. But anyway, there was another problem, and we started with solving that, and that was the risk of terrorist organizations taking part in the civil war in Syria, taking power over stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction are extremely dangerous, but they are especially dangerous if they get into the hands of non-government organizations which you can't retaliate against if they use the weapons of mass destruction. And that's why it was so urgent and so important that the major powers agreed that with the help of the United Nations, there should be a destruction of the stockpiles of chemical weapons inside Syria before it went into even more wrong hands in the course of the Syrian civil war. I think that what we will see in the future, if the negotiating process is now going on between Israel and Palestine, which is always very, very difficult and difficult to answer, will it this time finally be successful? All the negotiations to come about the Syrian civil war, there will be, after a possible agreement, a huge role for the United Nations to oversee the implementation of any kind of agreement. There will also be the necessity of putting on the ground UN observers, UN peacekeeping missions of different kinds to this turbulent region. And we should certainly, from the side of Denmark, participate in that if we were so lucky that agreements were made to progress kind of compromise in Syria, or to finally make an agreement which paves the way for an independent and livable Palestinian state. Of course, the United Nations will have to deal with a lot of other problems in the months and years to come. The principal mentioned the 2015 goals for reducing poverty and creating employment in the poor countries. We have been rather successful in reaching the original goals from around the turn of the century. Very big part of the success actually took place in China. There are large areas of this world where poverty has to be fought much more vigorously and with the help of much more resources from developed countries in order to support development. And that is not only traditional development assistance through bilateral or through the United Nations, but it's also about opening markets, supporting economic development in any other ways, and that will take big international agreements to create that also, and the United Nations will have to play a very important role here. I think, and that would be my last remark, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, was here in Copenhagen a couple of weeks ago. I met with him. We had a discussion about the priorities, also because I'm brought forward as a nominee for the presidency of the UN General Assembly in 2015, 1 year from there, by the Western European group. I don't know if that will actually take place, but I'm a candidate, and we had a discussion about what would be the work in the years to come. And he said, I think very, very rightly so, we have in the next goals for 2030, whatever, to combine much more closely the goals to fight poverty and the goals to fight the imbalance in the global climate. Because if we don't combine those, if we don't hit two things with the same stone, we are in a very, very, very strong risk of, during your years, of creating very big new conflicts in this world. Climate change will bring hundreds of millions of people on the move. It will create conflicts about land between countries. It will drive millions and millions and millions as economic refugees to our shores. We will not be able to just say, don't come, but if we are not able to create the conditions for the millions and millions in the poor countries to live and work in their own place, we will probably not be able to manage at all hundreds of millions coming to the rich part of the world. So there are big challenges, and all of them, when we name them, it's very easy to say that without some kind of binding international agreements, no solution will be found. And where is the solutions to be negotiated and dealt with? Of course, the United Nations. I wish you a very, very good conference. I hope you will save the world together with us.